So in this two videos, I'm just going to be going through some key points from chapters 1 and chapter 2. I'm not going to try and cover everything because it's only going to be two sort of 12 to 15-minute videos. Just things you don't need to be aware of. As I said, I won't be asking you any questions on this dot point here, all about economic activity and material and non-material living standards. But um, all the other things in the first chapter will be testable. So we'll go through a couple of them. First of all, one question from a practice sack is, your grandma passes away and gives you $5 million. Do you still face the problem of relative scarcity and opportunity cost? And the correct answer is yes. Even though $5 million is a lot of money, you still have scarce amount of money compared to your available wants. So there are various things you can do with $5 million. We're purchasing a house, going on a holiday, setting up a business, etc., etc. So whilst you can do many of those things, you may not be able to satisfy all of your wants. So the opportunity cost would be whatever decision you chose not to make. So you might want to basically buy a sports team, and you want to build a mansion. If you choose to build a mansion, you might not have money for the sports team. So you still face relative scarcity. You still have limited money, even though it's a lot, and you still face sacrifices. And your next best alternative would be your opportunity cost. Define the term relative scarcity and explain with use of an example the link to opportunity cost. It's a basic economic problem where our wants and needs are unlimited, where our resources are limited. Therefore, we need to make choices. Whatever choice we forego is our opportunity cost. Provide a good, clear example, because that's what asks you in the question. So if an individual chooses to spend their limited money on a house, they may forego the opportunity to go on a holiday, which would be the next best alternative, which is an opportunity cost. Resources, how's that used in economics? Basically, the resources are the inputs used by businesses in the production process. So they're the land, labor, and capital that we use to make products. So be mindful they need to be used to make goods and services to be classified as resources. Natural resources, man-made, provide examples. Labor resources, the talents of individuals and the work that we put in as humans. And capital resources are manufactured products that we use in the production process to produce goods and services. This idea of positive and normative statements, people are pretty good at. Just be mindful that the statements you need to be economic in nature. So positive statements are statements of fact. They can be verified. Normative statements are statement of opinion. But, saying that bananas are yellow isn't a positive economic statement. It's a true statement, but it has to be something related to economics. So, China's got a bigger GDP than Australia is a positive statement because it can be verified and tested. The fact that the minimum wage should be increased or we should provide more welfare is a normative statement because it's a matter of opinion. This is a question that's been trumping a lot of people on the practice sack. So which of the following will have a different impact on the PPF than the other three? So first one, this should be A. I don't know what's happened there. A, B, C, D. Firms utilizing idle machinery. That will cause us to go from within our PPF to on our PPF. Employers increasing their work hours. Again, the quantity and quality of resources hasn't changed. So we're just moving from a point inside our PPF to on our PPF. And same with this last one, paying workers for performance rather than a set wage. If that increases how hard they work, it means that they were working within their PPF in the first place. So that's not actually improving the quantity or quality of resources. The correct answer is this one here. So B, if I did it properly. Employers spending more money on training and development, that's the only thing that's going to improve the quality of resources and therefore is the only one that shifts the PPF. The others just cause us to move closer to our PPF or our productive capacity. Is it possible for a country to consume outside the PPF? The answer is yes. You can consume but not produce outside the PPF. And one way we can do that is by specialization. So if we specialize in areas of comparative advantage, meaning we basically we produce the product where we have a lower opportunity cost, then that is possible. Countries can only consume outside their PPF for a short period of time if they're not trading, otherwise they'll run out of resources. But it is possible to consume outside your PPF if you specialize and trade based on areas of comparative advantage. With this question here, it asks you with reference to the PPF diagram, so the table, which combination of production might achieve allocative efficiency. Now, two things with allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency is the point that's going to maximize our living standards. So if we valued both products equally, you would argue that point D is the most allocatively efficient because it produces the most output and therefore maximizes the satisfaction of consumers. But that only applies if we value both products equally. The other thing you could argue is that cigarettes are bad for people. So you could argue the allocatively efficient point is E, because it'll pretend that's the combination with no cigarettes that maximizes our benefits for society, because we're not producing any unhealthy products and therefore maximizing the nation's well-being. So you could make an argument for E there as well. In relation to the PPF, what's the difference between a country working within the PPF and the PPF shifting outwards? So a country working inside the PPF is not utilising all its resources as efficiently as they could. So there could be idle labour, idle capital, or resources that aren't being used, and unemployment of resources. Whereas the PPF shifting inwards means there's actually a reduction, and these are the key words. Okay? The quantity or quality of resources has actually changed, which has reduced our productive capacity. So it might be because of a natural disaster. People might emigrate to other countries. But the key thing is that the quantity and quality of resources has gone down on the back of some sort of event. It's not just because we're not using our resources. The actual quantity or quality has changed. And the second question, why is the PPF bowed outwards? Use an example. The PPF is bowed outwards because resources are not equally suited to both types of production. Opportunity costs will therefore vary along the PPF. So the more of a good or service we produce, the higher the opportunity cost, if we start to use resources that are less suited to that type of production. So, for example, if we're using all our resources to make robots, the first pizza we make, the opportunity cost is small because we'll shift the resources that are most suited to making pizzas first, and then we'll start to shift resources that were more suited to making robots, so the opportunity cost will increase. And last thing for this chapter is explaining how do we answer these three key economic questions. So what and how much to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Okay, the first one is basically what types of products are we going to make? And that's largely in a country like Australia based on consumer sovereignty. Producers are self-interested and profit motivated, so they will produce the goods and services that maximize their profits, and they're the products that are in demand. So self-interested, profit motivated producers will shift resources into areas that maximize their profits based on what consumers demand. However, the government also intervenes through banning, taxing, and limiting production of certain products because they're bad for society, and also subsidizes more desirable products like education and health because they have positive benefits for society. In terms of how to produce, it's basically how we're going to make stuff. So you can be labor or capital intensive, and basically businesses will use whatever's most cost effective and profitable. So if it's cheaper to use labor, they'll use labor. If it's cheaper to use capital, they'll use capital. The government can also intervene through things like minimum wages and subsidies and things like that. So minimum wage, for example, would increase the cost of using labour, so firms might be more capital intensive. Whereas if they give subsidies for using labour, firms might be more labour intensive because they're getting money back. So these factors will impact the relative cost of using capital versus labour. For whom to produce is based on who gets access to the products that the society produces. So in Australia, it's largely people who have skills because they generate higher incomes, and then they get access to more goods and services. So people that possess talents or skills that are in demand will generate higher incomes because they're making a more worthwhile contribution to the production process. However, the government also steps in to prevent inequality, and they do that through public housing, a progressive tax system, and other ways to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. Okay, so they're the main things from chapter 1. In terms of chapter 2, we'll go through each of these, but the traditional behaviour, new developments in consumer behaviour, external influences influencing consumer behaviour, incentives, which is what we'll spend a bit of time on, and how technological change and the sharing economy has impacted human behaviour. So first of all, three assumptions of traditional economics. Make sure you know the assumptions really well. All those things like present bias and bounded rationality and bounded self-interest, none of those are traditional views. They're all behavioural economist views. The traditional views, the ones we studied at the start, so looking at things like that people have ordered preferences, we make fully informed decisions, so we're rational, so we always weigh up the costs and benefits of decisions, and we make logical and calculated decisions as opposed to just haphazard emotional decisions. We have ordered preferences, so we know how much we value certain products, and we can rank them based on how much we value them. And lastly, that we have all perfect information when we make decisions. We don't make haphazard decisions. We know information about the product we're buying and about the other characteristics of other products in that market as well. The other one is the diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so why would traditional economists say that placing healthy food at eye level is a waste of time? Well, basically, they would assume that consumers are already making rational decisions. They're already going to weigh up. They're going to look at all the different options. They're not going to make haphazard decisions. So it's a waste of time putting healthy food at eye level because people will check out all the different options and choose the option that's best for them. And just putting something randomly in a certain place is not going to help. Okay, so continuing on. Um, Okay, behavioral economists are interested in how people actually behave. So this question is asking you, with reference to two decision-making errors, explain the ability of consumers to make rational decisions when buying a house. So we talked about this a bit in class, but two things that might be that they're overconfident, so they might take on too much debt and buy a house that's too expensive, and then think they're going to get a better job and regret it because they go into too much debt and can't pay back their loan. Vividness is another example where consumers place too much weight on a small number of vivid observations. So while a person may undertake extensive research, they might also place too much importance on what a friend tells them and then use that as their basis for buying a house. You could also talk about anchoring and how if a real estate agent quotes a really high price initially and then says the price has come down, that might anchor you and think it's a really good buy, and you might be willing to buy that house as well. Okay, so with reference to one area within behavioral economics, compare traditional versus behavioral economics. So traditional economists view consumers' behavior, they believe they're completely rational, they act with perfect information, they weigh up all the costs and benefits before making choices. We have ordered preferences, and we're subject to diminishing marginal utility. So rational, perfect information, weigh up benefits and costs, ordered preferences, diminishing marginal utility are some of your key ones. Sorry for drawing all over this slide. Whereas behavioral economists disagree with this idea of homo economicus and believe that people are actually swayed by their emotions and external influences. So consumers only experience bounded rationality and are subject to various cognitive biases like herd behavior and anchoring, etc., etc. They also have bounded self-interest and bounded self-willpower. So behavioral economists actually use experiments to see how people actually behave. So like the ultimatum game showed that people often act in their own, to be fair, rather than just in their own self-interest. Um, and they care about other consumers and other people, not just their own selfish desires. Okay, so bounded rationality and what's meant by satisfices. So bounded rationality basically says the consumers, their ability to make rational decisions is compromised by a range of different factors. Okay, they have limited cognitive abilities and face time constraints, and therefore, because of that, they often make mental shortcuts and just make quick, fast decisions. So, like when you're buying your lunch, this might come into play. Rather than just weighing up all the different sandwiches on offer and all the different foods, you basically just pick one quickly and you make quick, fast decisions that are kind of good enough because it's not that big a decision. Whereas if you're buying a house, you're probably going to take up more time. But satisficing is just when you make fast, frugal decisions because often it's not worth the time and effort to make more informed decisions. Bounded willpower and boundedness, I've pretty much talked about this, but bounded willpower, we don't possess absolute self-control. We're often subjected to our appetites and urges. We often fall victim to the present bias and can be short-sighted. So, e.g. overeating because it tastes good, but you regret the future, problem gambling, taking illicit drugs. Bounded self-interest is also that we care about fairness and we're not always driven by self-interest. E.g., we might reject proposals that treat others unfairly or us unfairly, even if it's in our own financial best interests, to accept that offer. So like when we have the example where you guys played the ultimatum game, if you got a really low offer and they said $2 when they're splitting the $50, you didn't take that because it wasn't fair, even though technically you're better off taking it because you get zero if you reject that proposal. Okay. And lastly, 3 internal and 3 external influences that might impact consumer decision. So internal influences, personality, the attributes of individuals, they have a powerful impact on how we act. For example, some people might be looking for social status or to try and increase their position in society, so they buy sports cars and designer clothes. Other things like ethics, so moral principles that guide how we behave, e.g. you might only buy fair trade goods, or you might, your ethical might be you're a vegetarian for your own personal ethical beliefs. Habit is another example where people do the same thing over and over again without limited cognitive effort and not much thought, and that's another thing, an internal influence. run out of time, so I'll finish the rest of this in the next video.